and welcome to the Martin County Bar Association's Law Day presentation on what you need to know about auto accidents. I'm Sean Plymel, an attorney here in Stuart, and I'm with Tony Barletta from Brightway Insurance as a guest, and also Jeff Cosby, who's also an attorney, and he is from Williams, Leniger & Cosby, and we're going to be talking about all the things that you need to know about auto accidents, from obtaining insurance, which we brought Tony to talk about the insurance aspect of it, to what you need to do if you're in an automobile accident, which is what I'm going to talk about, and then Jeff's going to talk about the other side of it from the insurance company's perspective. So we're going to have a conversation today and answer all of your questions. So Tony, we'll kind of start out with you. What does somebody need to know even when they're going to get auto insurance? I mean, we see commercials nonstop of how easy it is and you can get whatever you want, but from what we know, it's a little more complicated than they make it sound on these commercials.
And they do. You know, Sean, in Florida, we're required by minimum to have property damage and PIP coverage, and certainly that's not the approach that we want to take in my agency. We certainly try to explain to our clients that coverages that are necessary are things like bodily injury and property damage, certainly PIP coverage to protect their medical expenses, then collision and comprehensive coverage for their vehicles. And then we also offer them uninsured motorist protection, which pays for their injuries if they're hit by an uninsured driver or an underinsured driver. And then in addition to that, we also offer some ancillary coverages of towing and labor, rental reimbursement in the event of an accident.
Well, and obviously there's a lot of kind of terms of art that we've talked about, and while Jeff and I hear them all the time in handling these cases once they reach the stage where lawyers get involved, a lot of people out there don't know. And when you talk about the minimum coverages and you talk about PIP insurance, what exactly is PIP? Because we hear about it a lot when the legislature's in session, but what exactly is that coverage and what does it mean?
Well, we tell people what PIP coverage is here in Florida. It pays for, you get a $10,000 limit of PIP coverage, which pays for 80% of your medical expenses, 60% of your loss of income, or up to $5,000 in death benefit. And you could use that money any way you want. You could use 80% for medical expenses, so 80% of $10,000. You could use up to $8,000 for medical expenses. You would then forfeit the loss of income. And if you weren't killed, of course, you wouldn't have to use the death benefit. And we try to tell people the importance of having that with no deductible to get the maximum use out of it for commensurate with the price that they pay for PIP coverage.
And that's a required coverage as part of the Florida no-fault system, isn't that correct?
Florida no-fault mandates that coverage, as well as the property damage.
So basically, and it's one of the things, and I think Jeff and I hear quite a bit when somebody comes and says, well, I have full coverage. You know, we always hear that term of art. But in the state of Florida, so the only thing that you're required to have is the PIP insurance that covers your medical expenses, which a lot of people don't understand is paid by your own insurance company, even if you weren't at fault in the accident. And then the only other thing you're required to carry is $10,000 in coverage for if you damage somebody else's property, and that's it.
That's perfectly said. Most people walk in and they right away believe they've got full coverage with just those two coverages. And there's just so much more to it. You know, certainly the property damage is important to protect you from what you've damaged, but how about the fact that you can be sued if you don't have bodily injury coverage protection to protect you from someone you may hurt in an accident, as well as if your vehicle has certainly a lien on it, you owe money on it through a bank or a lending institution, you've got to have collision and comprehensive coverage for the value of protection of that car.
I have a client. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, Tony, how do you approach UM coverage when people come in and a lot of people don't know what UM coverage means or what it covers? How can that help someone that's involved in an accident on South Florida roads?
Some of the statistics that I've seen through the industry over the years have certainly given me enough information to share with people the importance of having uninsured motorists, which is your protection against a hit-and-run driver, a driver with no insurance, or an underinsured driver who hits and physically hurts you, and basically could put you out of work. You know, if you don't have things like a long-term disability, short-term disability, this can be a way in which you get monies back for someone else's accident with you. And people always look at me and they say, well, wow, if I buy an insured motorist and I'm hit by an uninsured driver, well, who will I get money from? They have no insurance. in reality, of course, we know we get it from your own company. It's kind of a fund saved just for that. And I believe it's extremely important with the amount of people that we clearly know in Florida that do not have insurance and are driving around uncovered, that it's extremely important to have uninsured motorists.
And even scarier, Tony, what we just talked about is people aren't required to have bodily injury coverage. So even if so many of those people that think they have full coverage, they're out there driving around, and if they're in an accident that injures you and they just have the basic minimums, there's no money there to compensate you if you are injured.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, the statistics in Florida, and the last time the Office of Insurance Regulation put some stats out, you know, there are almost 45% of the drivers in Florida don't have insurance.
That's a scary number.
It's a scary number. Those numbers get really tainted as we go south and, well, let's say, west. So the metropolitan areas of Miami,
Sure.
Broward County, Tampa, Hillsborough County, increase those numbers of uninsured drivers. People who, and I see it, they don't generally come into my agency because we like to think of ourselves as a preferred agency. But people who just try to buy the minimum, and there's a expression.
Over the phone.
You got it, whether it's over the phone or in some little store that they call, you know, PIP and ZIP, which is just the minimum coverages. And they walk into someone, they try to buy that coverage, they ask for the minimum down payment, they give the minimum down payment, only to not make the next payment, and then they go for the next 10 months without insurance. That's why uninsured motorists is so important.
Absolutely.
We hear it all the time.
You call it PIP and ZIP, I call it crackhead insurance. So I'm like, you have the insurance of somebody that seriously didn't take it into consideration. And I deal with about half of the people that come to my office that have been involved in an auto accident. I unfortunately have to tell them that I can't help them because there is no applicable insurance. We obviously will start the case, obtain the information, but inevitably I'm sitting in a situation in which they don't. You know, there's no coverage afforded. And I have one right now that I'm handling where there's no BI, so there's nothing that we can obviously do on the injuries that are sustained. Thankfully, they have at least the PIP to get some medical treatment, but then also the at-fault party only had $10,000 worth of coverage, and there's $15,000 worth of damage to the car. So she's in a situation where she's going to be out $5,000 on that because she didn't have collision, you know, on the vehicle as well. And in that one, even the insurance company is asking for her to write over the car too. And I'm like, well, no, she at least gets to keep the car to scrap it or see what she can do to make up the $5,000. But so all of those coverages are important. But the biggest thing, and I think one of the things, as you said, as a preferred agency that a lot of people don't get when they go the quick route or over the phone, is they don't get an understanding of what they're either buying or what they're choosing not to buy. Because the conversations that I have with them is, what is UM? I don't even know what UM is. They have very little understanding of what they could have even bought in those situations. So it's certainly something that people need to take some time to really see what's important to them and what they need and what they can afford.
Recapping a transaction to a client, or certainly in the beginning, sitting down, finding out what their needs are, seeing what they do for a living, their driving habits, dictates how we want to approach that client from the beginning, of explaining to them just what they need from the form of insurance coverages. So it's not just we'll match what you walked in the door with, because a lot of times people walk in the door
shopping
with what
price.
you just said. They're shopping a price, and it's more than price. It's the value you're going to get. It's the protection we're going to afford you when the situation is most needed. You're involved in an accident. You don't want to go out of your pocket if you don't have to. So if you have the right coverages for the right dollar amount, and there's a dollar amount afforded to it that's commensurate with what you can afford, but most of all, what you need to have. That's extremely important. And that process in my agency has always been, we sit down with the client, we have that interview, and then we go through the coverages step by step, explaining what BI and PD do, explaining what and how PIP works, what uninsured motorist does for you, where collision comes into play as compared to comprehensive, and then why you would want to have things like rental reimbursement and towing and labor on your policy. You take that transaction with a client, you educate them so that they're a consumer who understands what they have, it makes it a whole lot easier if there is an accident.
Well, and certainly it can make things easier in the next part that we're going to talk about is in the unfortunate situation where an accident does occur.
Absolutely.
Because that's when Jeff and I, and certainly I'm a little bit even before Jeff's involved in those process, but I have people that obviously come into my office and they need representation, and they've been involved in an auto accident, and the question that I always get right off the bat is, well, why do I need you? And what I explain to them in that situation is that it is a complicated process. There are a lot of different moving parts to it that need to be done. But as I explained to him, is we don't know where you're going to be 6 months from now. Because initially after an accident, you're sore, you're banged up, but you don't know how bad those injuries are going to be. And so what I talk to him about is making sure that they do the things that they need to do. And Jeff, you and I have seen just in the recent past the changes in the PIP law to get the benefits of the PIP insurance you're required to have has changed as far as the time frames that you have to even go see the doctor.
Right.
Namely the one that changed to now you need to see a medical provider within 14 days to seek treatment, or you're not afforded the PIP benefits that you were before.
Right.
And that's been a big change, I think, that we've seen in the recent past.
PIP seems to be a hot topic with the legislature. It used to be every few years, now it's every other year, now every year, where they talk about doing away with PIP and changing it around. So I don't think we're finished with the world of PIP and the changes that we'll see.
It seems like every session they have to play with it at some point. It's like that toy they can't put down to a certain degree. But obviously somebody comes in, they seek medical treatment. We try to negotiate with the insurance company to reach a resolution. And that's a back and forth process. And I tell people all the time that I don't make up stories. I only tell stories. And until I get all of your medical documentation, and until you're really at a point in your treatment where the doctor can tell you what the future holds for you, there's not a lot to tell. Usually that's a 3 to 4, sometimes even 6-month process, depending on the nature of their injuries. But one of the things in the state of Florida, and Jeff and I argue about this one when we get way down the road to trial a lot, is you're not entitled to anything above and beyond your out-of-pocket expenses, namely your medical, unless you can prove that you've suffered a permanent injury. So that's one of the things that we're always asking the physicians to document. And it's important that people know that when they are in an auto accident, that the medical treatment that they're seeking can certainly be with their providers that they've used in the past, or people that they know, or people that they like, but they need to make sure that those providers know that it's related to an auto accident, because in a normal context, the doctor's not really looking at whether there's a permanent injury or not. He's treating the symptoms, he's treating the injury, he's giving you the best medical treatment that you need. So there's some different things that we look for from the medical providers in order to tell that story. And then ultimately we ask for money. We make a demand to the insurance company. And I always tell folks that we're hopeful that we reach a resolution. Unfortunately, sometimes we're not, and that's what Jeff and I will certainly talk about as the next phase. But one of the misnomers that I want to kind of dispel out there, because I have a lot of great folks that come in that I've known, having grown up here for years and years, and they come in and say, well, I'm not the type to sue anybody. And I tell them, either am I. And they say, well, how is that possible? You're an attorney. That's what you do every day. And I said, no, I try to reach a resolution with the other party. And the example that I always use with folks is, if my neighbor runs over my mailbox, I don't sue him the next day. I go over and say, hey, you hit my mailbox, how do you want to do it? How do we work this out? And we try to come to a resolution. And I do the same approach when we're dealing with an insurance company, because one of the things that's important for people to realize is the insurance company is just a representative of the individual that was involved in the accident with you. Ultimately, if we sue anybody, we don't sue insurance companies. We sue individuals that hopefully have insurance, and they are provided counsel, like Jeff, from their insurance company, but you're actually naming that other person on there. So we take that very seriously before we take that step, and we only do it if we're not able to reach an amicable resolution. And in most cases, well, I don't know if it's most, but certainly in quite a few of them, we are able to reach that resolution. But if not, we begin the litigation process. But before that, Tony, because Jeff and I are going to talk about how that whole part plays out, right after the accident, I've talked about what's important from my standpoint. What's important from your standpoint as the agent? Should they notify you? Obviously, they're going to call their insurance company on the card, but how are you involved in the immediately after accident part of those things?
Part of the process, in the in the debrief at the end of the transaction when we've sold someone an auto policy is to talk about an auto accident, what they should be doing. And certainly we tell people stay as calm as you can. Are there any injuries? Seek shelter as soon as you can. Get your car to the side of the road if it's a minor accident. Have a checklist of things you certainly want to have available to you so that you know who you need to contact, what you need